Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Zenity webinar, From Ancient Greece to Now, a History of the Democratization of Application Development and Security. My name is Andrew Silverman. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Zenity, and I have the very special pleasure of being joined by Ben Kliger, the CEO and co-founder of Zenity. Ben is an 18-plus year security veteran in the space. He's held previous security leadership positions within Microsoft before founding Zenity as the first security governance platform for citizen development, low code, Gen AI application development in 2021. And we're joined by Jason Chan, the former VP of InfoSec at Netflix. Jason has a really interesting security story for those of you who don't know him. He joined Netflix in 2011 as one of the first security people hired to sort of bring along the cloud security motion at Netflix. And was eventually promoted to oversee the entire security function. So he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to this conversation to talk again about, business-led development, how application development and security is changing. And, we're going to leave you with a bunch of really interesting conversation points and recommendations. So Ben and Jason are going to have a really engrossing conversation, and I'll pitch it over to you, Ben, to kick things off.
Thanks for the intro. Andrew and Jason, it's going to be fun. Really looking forward to do this. So obviously, we know that the world of business application development has changed quite dramatically over the last few years. I'm not sure how many people in the audience actually understand that citizen development is like all over the place, especially when we look at the very largest enterprises in the world, leveraging major SaaS platforms like the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, like Salesforce, like ServiceNow. It's really all over within the business productivity suite, within the office and the email clients. It's all over the place. I'm actually curious to hear, Jason, from your perspective, how is the world of business-led development and application development changed over the years, and how does this look from the security perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Glad to be here, and thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. Yeah, I mean, I would say in my career, 25 years or so, I think generally software has just changed so much, right? We sort of started in this world where we were either procuring kind of direct commercial software or building it in-house with kind of a specialized set of developers. And then I would say the first real sort of change wave was around open source and SaaS generally, which to me kind of diversified sort of how we procure and operate software. And then to your point on business-led development, I think that's what's really kind of exploded things, both from a productivity side, but also security as well, because now, in addition to these kind of primary audiences of developers or maybe third parties who are selling SaaS or selling software, you now have the population is just much larger. So now you have all these folks within the business, whether it's marketing or sales, really any other organization, that are now building like pretty much full-fledged business applications. So I think my primary sort of observation on the security side is that most security teams have really oriented themselves around a fairly small number of relationships internally when you think about application security. So you think about partnering with your engineering teams, partnering with IT teams around procurement. And now that all the business units are basically software creators, you now have to figure out how do I sort of extend my reach and my influence into all these other organizations that you maybe previously didn't have orientation towards.
100% agree. The entire landscape is really changing under our legs. So many times we don't even know that it's happening in the business, that those business users are creating such meaningful business applications. It's a new world of development. I fully agree. I'm actually also curious, kind of as a follow-up, like what do you think about traditional AppSec in this sense? From what, of course, we know as an industry, there is a big focus on internal first-party development, on coding, of course, repos, like full CI/CD cycle. What do you think about it with regards to the world of business application development?
Totally. I think that's one of the things that security teams are trying to figure out now, right? We've spent, say, the last 10, 15 years really figuring out how do we integrate our controls into traditional or I would say modern software engineering life cycles. You mentioned CI/CD and source control, all those sorts of things. And now, yeah, we have a kind of a totally different paradigm. You have business-led development where you may not even have a source code repo, right? You may not have an integration point or a testing point where you can insert, and you may be dealing with platforms that have limited security capability. So I think I mean, I would say, Ben, I remember we had a conversation earlier where I think a lot of AppSec teams even are thinking about ownership, right? Because they traditionally owned responsibility for first party development, but now that this is greatly expanded, how should they think about that? Should that be AppSec? Should it be corporate security? And I always tend to think, ultimately security is going to be responsible. You sort of have to figure out how to distribute that internally. But I think on that side, Ben, I would have a question for you. I mean, obviously, Zenity has chosen to kind of focus on this subset of this really large and kind of burgeoning set of developers. And I'm curious, like, what did you see as the gap between whether it was current AppSec tools or processes or even mindsets where it made sense to kind of address this population?
Of course, it's basically the whole inspiration for Zenity, right? I mean, one of the core hypotheses that we believe in is, of course, that business application development is only going to grow, and the ownership of citizen developers creating it is basically not only that it's not going anywhere, it's only going to expand even further. We saw that firsthand at Microsoft, right? Both me and Michael, my co-founder and CTO, we were in the cloud security and the CTO divisions there, and we saw firsthand the big impact that the Microsoft ecosystem, right, which is so meaningful in every enterprise today. It's Power Apps and Power Automate and Power BI. It's so heavily embedded into these Microsoft offerings, and we saw the big impact that it is making both internally at Microsoft as well as Microsoft clients. And then the question that come to mind is it secure? Like, all of a sudden we give so much power to regular Joes, people that are non-techies, right? Not only that, of course, that they don't know a lot about security, but most of the time, as you said, marketing, sales, analysts, they don't usually write code, usually, right? But all of a sudden, they have strong capabilities to build business applications, automation, reports, co-pilots today as well. How do we make sure that they don't expose the organization to risk? So first thing that we identified is, well, all of a sudden we have such a major population of new builders in the organization. Do they even go through security training, right? I mean, SDLC is simply kind of, not applicable to these people, right? But they still develop, even though they don't rely on code, they still develop with drag and drop, with AI, they still develop. And when you look at, from our perspective, the application security processes and toolings that are currently in place, they all rely heavily on traditional professional development, right? They rely on the fact that there is a code to scan, right? They rely on the fact that there is some sort of CI/CD, a way to plug in to the code, even basic concepts of separating a production environment from a development environment, right? I mean, all of these concepts are simply of no existence in this world of business application development. So when you combine the fact that there are new type of developers with a new type of technology to build business applications, and of course velocity that makes it such a big problem, we think that there is a new solution that organizations need to think about, and that's of course why we built Zenity.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, yeah, obviously the need is huge, the opportunity is huge.
Perfect. So of course, as we understand the landscape a bit better, and of course, we know that the number of new developers is just so big. Eventually, it's a lot about human error, right? A lot. We know that organizations think about risks with regards to insider risk, right? So we know that 88% of data breaches are actually caused by human errors. Now all of a sudden, again, we provide such meaningful tools at the end of so many more people. As I say, with great power comes a great responsibility, or as my good friend Spider-Man says. All of a sudden, there are so many new apps, but of course, they also expose new risks and vulnerabilities. And we see some numbers here in the slide about amount of vulnerabilities that we are finding when we're working with some of our clients, especially with the Fortune 100 type of organizations. These are just mind-blowing numbers, both the side of the vulnerabilities as well as the amount of applications and stuff that people build. It's not something that security teams or security programs can actually track manually, right? Not even close to that. Not even if you remove 1 0 from the equation. What are your thoughts, Jason?
Yeah, I think you hit it right at the end there. Like this idea that, manual approaches. I mean, my opinion, I think manual approaches to security have never really been ideal. And I would say, having spent most of my career really focusing on application security and product security, it's even with kind of traditional sort of security team to developer relationships, I would say we're always, I think broadly in the industry, AppSec skills tend to be, we just don't have enough, right? We don't have enough folks in application security to match demand. So when now you open up these floodgates, and I think the slide is great, right? So now if we have this many more developers, this much more code, I think it's a really, really interesting tension because, ultimately citizen developers, they're just trying to get their jobs done in a more effective way, right? They're not trying to cause security issues.
Correct.
They're not trying to cause compliance issues. But I think there's not many things you can predict in security, but one that I would feel pretty confident in is that we're only ever going to be more regulated, right? There's only ever more kind of additional regulatory regimes that companies need to adhere to, and I think especially with a lot of these things around consumer protection, right? So we have this kind of regulatory tension where we have more to deal with, so we have to ensure that these controls are integrated into our development processes. And when you enable citizen development, you're really unlocking a massive amount of business value, but there is certainly a potential that the controls that we've implemented in our more traditional environments, they're just not, it's hard to translate those one-to-one to these citizen developer platforms. So I think it's a really interesting time where we have more and more ability to deliver value, but there's also just this increasing risk, especially on the regulatory front, which is I think one that is on most CISOs' minds that I've been talking to in the last few years.
Yeah, that's indeed interesting. And again, it's an only ever growing trend, which I agree at its core, it's a positive trend, right? I mean, we bring people closer to technology. We allow more people from different skills to become modern professionals. It's it's beautiful, right? When we think about it, back at the time, like only coders, could be kind of become. Let's call it do things on their own. You always had that cousin that could program something for you, very fast if you wanted to get the job done. And all of a sudden, again, any person can do it. So I think it's really amazing. Even many friends that I have that are actually not a part of our industry, I hear them using automation tools, and of course Gen AI today with the entire sort of open AI trends over the last year, and ChatGPT have become really, really popular. So yeah, it's not going anywhere, and it's important for us as security leaders and as an industry to really think about how we're going to approach it for the years to come. I also know, Jason, in our previous discussions, and generally speaking, when I talk to security leaders many times, they look at this problem space as sort of, they refer to it as a shadow application development, right? Many times, when SaaS was introduced, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, something like that, and still today, organizations think about shadow IT, right? Sort of an extension of the internal tooling that we're using. And here we have something which is, it's shadow IT, but it's an internal shadow IT, right? It's a shadow application development. Any thoughts about that? How do you perceive it?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I sort of think of low code, no code citizen development as kind of like this second wave of what we would call shadow IT. And I think that first wave, which feels like it was maybe, 15 years ago, where it was primarily SaaS. I think it's a reasonable way to think about it. One of the ways I would tend to coach either security or technology leaders in terms of how they sort of wrap their brain around that is that you have to kind of think of, kind of getting back to my earlier point, right? It's these folks they're not trying to cause problems. They're just trying to get their jobs done. So I would say folks should look at the growth of low code, no code citizen development as kind of this signal, right? There's a demand, right? There's a demand somewhere in the business. There's a problem that can be somewhat solved through technology. So I would think of it not as something that needs to be like discovered and shut down, but really more like discovered and embraced and enabled. Because I mean, as security teams, we've really historically been seen as kind of the department of no, right? We're like we're the place where things go to get shut down, right? So I think that's, I mean, it was never really a viable approach, but it's now more than ever, when you think about every company is really to some degree a software company, right? They're going to compete based on their ability to sort of properly or efficiently or effectively implement technology. So if you believe that that's the case, then we really need, I mean, I think it's important to discover these uses, partially just to understand like how is the business working, but also to understand like how is our attack surface changing? Like where are those threats coming from? Like what are these platforms that are really appealing to these end users and they're finding to be really effective? So that would be really like the highest level advice would be, don't think of this as a bad thing. Think of it as a good thing. Like people are out there, they're innovating, they've got difficult problems to solve. They're self-selecting, they're self-solving. I think that that's a good thing. Now we do need to be able to provide mechanisms and guardrails so that they can do that in a safe way.
Fully agree. It's basically you're talking about an extension of our risk management and vulnerability management programs, right? There is a new wave here that is development happening in the business, and we need to make sure that we are not blocking it, but that we're actually providing guardrails so people feel free and that organizations actually feel safe to promote, of course, these technologies even further. Very similar to what happened, in software development, right? Originally, security was not part of that program, right? I mean, we are developers writing code, building stuff, and then bad stuff started to happen, of course. So we started to build programs around it. We started to scan their code. We started to have gates in place. It's the same problem re-emerging only in business-led development. Very similar risk as well, right? We're talking about third-party components that people can basically pull into the applications that they're building. We're talking about apps and automations that are moving sensitive data around the organization or outside of the organization. We're basically talking about AppSec in the traditional way, but only that there are no CVEs in this world, right? Because there is no code to really scan. Yeah, I agree.
And it's not that low code and no code and citizen development isn't challenging enough, but now we have generative AI, which is kind of these last couple of years have been sort of on top of everybody's mind and similarly unlocking tremendous value. So I'm curious, like how do you see generative AI kind of fitting into all this sort of paradigm of business-led development?
I think that in the last year, what we can all learn is that it's gonna change our lives, right? Of course, it's changing enterprises, but it's changing. It's gonna change every element of our life over the next few years. Of course, if it's a force multiplier, right? I mean, people, business users used to are still right using drag and drop interfaces, visual interfaces to build. Now they're also using prompts, right? They can talk to a chatbot that will create apps, automation, reports for them, or that they can actually create their own co-pilots, right, with no code or with the chat-based mechanism as well. So it's um, this whole world is really exploding because co-pilots, again, at their core, the technology, it's about empowering business to do more, empowering business users to query data faster, to get faster results, to get access to data that they were not necessarily aware that they have that access, and accordingly generate insights. So it's like a magic pill, I think, to everything that is going today in businesses in terms of the growth strategies, in terms of how much more they can achieve with these technologies. I think I personally always call Gen AI sort of no code on steroids. Right, it's really part of the no code movement, right? I mean, when you think about it, when you're using such a mechanism like you're not writing code, but it can generate code for you, right? You're not, for example, you're not creating a database query, but it gets you, or SQL query, of course, but it pulls data for you and it can manipulate it. It can take actions on your behalf. It's really an application that is always running in the background. Just in time sort of an application is running in the background and is pulling stuff, taking actions on your behalf continuously with your identity, with your colleague's identity, right? It really depends on how you're leveraging this copilot. So again, it also requires, of course, a lot of people today in the industry talk about AI security, and we have DLP solutions and firewall solutions, and we also need to have application security solutions, right, for Copilot, for the way that the Copilot is leveraging its access, the sort of point in time runtime that activities that it is doing. So I do think that there is an opportunity for us as a community and as an industry to be better and again promote these technologies and push everyone to the limit.
Yeah, and I think that the topic you hit on in terms of, where is the need? I think, it's a cliche, but one of the phrase I'll use often is or adversaries don't care about your org chart, right? They're going to kind of do their thing, and I think we as a security industry and as security teams, Gen AI is such an interesting technology, because if you think about, well, what parts of a traditional organization would think about Gen AI? Well, you're certainly going to have your vendor risk and third party risk. You're going to have data security. You're going to have application security, especially if you're talking about code generation. So it really starts to I don't know if I would say expose some of the limitations of traditional org structures, but it's really going to challenge teams to really think about scale, because, one of the things I would say, again, it's always hard to predict, but one of the things I would feel confident in is that, with Gen AI, especially code generation, if it's easier to generate code, you're going to have more code, right? So if you have more code, you have more code to secure. And again, kind of thinking about historically, you mentioned there's not CVEs, but I would say historically, right, there's just only ever more vulnerabilities, right? So when you really start to have more code, then you really have to start thinking about how you're going to scale your program, not through people, but through automation, through more discovery, more context, basically more automation. So
Yep, and code is of course one side of the house, right? I mean, whether developers use copilots to generate code for them or to fix code for them, or that they create LLM-based applications. That's part of, I would say, still the professional development side of the house. But then again, we see copilots in the business as well, right? For people who are starting to do a lot of very interesting stuff, such as, again, letting copilots taking actions on their behalf, summarizing emails that they're getting. So some level of access, right, that to very sensitive data, to leveraging their identity. So AppSec for business usage of copilots. That's one thing that I personally think is also going to grow dramatically, and that we need to put our hands around it. Cool. So, Jason, that's super, of course, interesting discussion to have, and I think that we can spend hours kind of, talking about the history and where we're going, and of course, Gen AI coming into the mix. It makes the whole thing even more complicated and interesting at the same time. We don't have a lot of more time, and I want to make sure that our audience is still with us. So I think we'll take kind of our last topic, and we can wrap up. So I think, we talked about a lot about the introduction of business empowerment capabilities, right, to regular people versus regular users, right, in the enterprise, versus application security versus security mindset, and where we need to invest and how we need to act as a community to be enablers and not blockers. Any final tip to security teams out there that are kind of struggling with this question of, I want to stop saying no, I want to say yes to people, but of course that we don't want to expose the organization to risk, right? So like how to do it, and of course to tie that question also to, I think we'll probably have some younger people listening as well that are making their first footsteps in the security industry. Like any tip with that regard to those people who are just starting their journey?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great topic. So it's a huge topic, but yeah, I think that's really the fundamental tension for security teams is how do you sort of take proper responsibility for securing an organization while also enabling it to actually get work done. I think it's a natural tension. I think I've gotten so much good advice over my career, but I remember one of my managers at Netflix. I think we were talking about like org changes and things like that, and we were talking about how do we sort of do these kinds of things better. And he mentioned to me it's when a business is growing and when technology is changing a lot, it's not about how do you sort of avoid change or maybe make it make the changes further in time and sort of less frequent. It's really about getting used to more frequent change. And I think that would be my advice as well, as for folks entering the industry is technology changes a lot, regulation changes a lot, everything really changes. So when you enter the security industry, that's kind of what you're signing up for, is this sort of acknowledgement that part of your own responsibility is sort of staying somewhat up to speed with what's happening. And I think if you sort of take that approach to security, my sense is like that's going to be that allows you to become a closer partner to the business, is recognizing, hey, we're along for the ride, right? We're not here to try to stop anything. We're also we want to take responsibility for the business's success. So I think that kind of slight orientation, it's a bit high level, but I think you kind of have to start there before you can get into the more detailed implementation.
That's a very good tip. Always adapt, because we don't know what's coming our way. I mean, I like it. I think it's a good tip for life in general, by the way. So thanks for that. And Jason, I really enjoyed the conversation. Looking forward to do it again. And thanks for the time and for the perspectives. And for our audience, if you have any questions, of course, you can feel free to reach out directly to me and to Jason. Would be happy to chat further.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you both for participating. It was a great session, great conversation. We've listed here Ben and Jason's LinkedIn profiles here. You can also, of course, visit us at zenity.io. Jason himself has a pretty unique LinkedIn profile for those of you who know him and are connected there, a purveyor of a frequent dad jokes. So can't miss content on there as well. So be sure to connect and get in touch with Ben as well there. But thank you everyone for the attention and hope to see you all soon.